Why did no one move when she was slapped? The summer heat pressed down on Fort Braxton like an iron weight, and inside the mess hall the air was thick with tension. Sarah Miller stood behind the serving counter, her face still warm where Captain Frank Townsend's hand had landed. A red mark was already forming along her cheek. Blood touched the corner of her lip, but she didn't flinch. She didn't reach for a napkin. She didn't cry out. She just looked at him. It wasn't the look of a cook in shock. It wasn't even the look of a woman humiliated in front of 100 silent witnesses. It was something else, colder, sharper. It made combat veterans at nearby tables straighten in their seats without realizing why. They'd seen that look in war zones, right before things went very, very wrong. But Townsend mistook the silence for fear. He always did. "That's better," he sneered, shaking out the sting from his palm as though striking her had been routine, natural. "See, boys, sometimes women just need a firm hand to remember their place." His squad laughed on cue, though none of them sounded convinced. Something about her stillness unsettled them, but they wouldn't admit it, not in front of him. Then the doors opened, and everything changed. The tall figure who stepped inside looked ordinary at first glance: khakis, a button-down shirt, cropped hair streaked with gray. But the moment his eyes swept the room, silence followed like a shadow. Even before he moved, before he spoke, men who had never met him felt their pulse quicken. John Miller, Sarah's husband. No one in that room knew exactly who he was, not yet, but every instinct screamed he was dangerous. The kind of dangerous that doesn't need to show itself until the moment it's too late. "Sarah," his voice was calm, level, but it carried through the air like a stone dropped into still water. Her eyes softened for just a second. "John, you're early." Flight got in sooner than expected. He stepped closer. He noticed the blood before anyone could blink, pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, dabbed at her lip with the kind of gentleness that broke the spell of silence more than violence ever could. Then his gaze lifted to Townsend. "Problem here." The captain straightened, whiskey on his breath. "This is military business, civilian. Walk away before you get hurt." John didn't move, didn't blink. "Seems to me someone's already hurt." His eyes flicked to Sarah. "My wife." It wasn't a shout, it wasn't a threat, but the weight of those two words, the calmness of them, settled like ice in the room. Soldiers who had done nothing when Sarah was slapped now felt ashamed of their silence. But still, no one stood up. Not yet. Townsend's smirk faltered. "Your wife needs to learn some respect for the uniform." "Respect." John repeated the word as though testing its taste. Interesting concept. His voice was quiet, but his presence pressed on the air like a storm front. And for the first time since he entered, even Townsend felt it. The captain snapped his fingers. "Boys, escort our friend out." Corporal Peterson grinned and stepped forward. His hand shot out to grab John's arm. And then he was on his knees, face twisted in pain, his wrist bent in a lock so clean and fast no one had seen how it happened. John hadn't raised his voice, hadn't broken a sweat. He just stood there, calm as stone, while Peterson struggled against a grip that wouldn't budge. "Don't," John said softly as another soldier reached for his sidearm. "You don't want to do that." The silence that followed was deafening. It was Colonel Henderson who broke it, a 60-year-old veteran with a scar across his jaw and a lifetime of battle behind his eyes. He rose from the corner table, his voice steady. "Stand down." The order carried more authority than rank. It carried history. Henderson had seen this before, long ago, in places no one admitted existed. He knew what he was looking at, and he knew he wasn't going to stop it. "Release him, please," the colonel added, his tone respectful. John complied without hesitation, stepping back as Peterson scrambled up, humiliated. Henderson's gaze lingered on John, searching, recognizing. Then he turned to Townsend. "Captain, my office. 1500 hours, don't be late." Townsend bristled, his pride bleeding out in front of his own men, but even he knew better than to argue here. He spat a promise instead. "This isn't over." And then they left. But the damage was done. The story would spread through Fort Braxton like fire, about the civilian who walked into the mess hall, faced down Townsend, and didn't flinch. About the cook who didn't cry when she was slapped, but looked back with eyes like ice. About the silence of soldiers who hadn't acted, and the quiet shame of knowing they'd watched dignity bleed. Later, Henderson would call them into his office, lock the door, activate the counter-surveillance protocols. He would call John something no one had said in over a decade. "Ghost." And Sarah would answer questions she wasn't supposed to answer, about midnight meetings, about missing weapons, about why a cook knew more about rifles than most lieutenants on the range. And Henderson would finally understand. Nothing about the Millers was simple. But that was later. For now, the only thing that mattered was the look on Sarah's face as she touched her cheek where the red mark faded. She didn't look broken. She didn't look afraid. She looked like a woman who had been patient far too long. And her silence spoke louder than any words could. Why did Colonel Henderson call him Ghost? The old man's voice still echoed in Sarah's mind as she walked beside John down the corridor toward his office. Soldiers parted around them like water breaking against rock. No one made eye contact. No one dared. The whispers would spread later, who he was, what he'd done. But now the base seemed to hold its breath. Henderson's office was tucked behind the security wing, an unremarkable door that hid decades of secrets. Inside, blinds were drawn tight. He locked the door, pressed a sequence on his keyboard, and a low hum filled the room. White noise. Anti-surveillance. Sarah recognized it instantly. The colonel leaned back in his chair, studying them as though seeing them for the first time. "It's been a long time, Ghost." John didn't deny it, didn't confirm it either. His face stayed still, eyes steady. 14 years, 7 months, he said quietly. Kabul, embassy extraction. Something flickered in Henderson's gaze. Memory, recognition, maybe regret. He exhaled slowly. "Never thought I'd see you here. Not like this. And certainly not married to one of my mess hall cooks." Sarah smiled faintly, touching the cheek where Townsend had struck her. "Life takes turns, Colonel, sometimes sharp ones." Henderson turned his gaze on her. "You're not just a cook." "No," she said evenly, "but I do make excellent pot roast." The colonel almost smiled, but his eyes stayed hard. "Why are you here?" John didn't answer. Sarah did, calm, direct. Her words carried weight, the precision of someone who had briefed senators in underground chambers. "Captain Townsend isn't just a bully, he's moving weapons, high-level systems. We believe Colonel Carter is covering for him." Henderson's hands tightened on the desk. "That's a serious accusation." "It's more than accusation," Sarah said, sliding a folded paper across the desk. "He dropped this 2 days ago harassing one of my staff. Access codes, level you shouldn't see floating in anyone's pocket." Henderson unfolded it, his jaw tightened. "Special Weapons Depot." "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "And the timing matches the arrival of the new HIMARS systems." For a long moment, Henderson just stared at them. A man caught between duty and survival, between the chain of command and the truth he couldn't ignore. Finally, he looked back at John. "You're here because you knew this was happening." John didn't blink. "Sarah called me, said things were escalating." "Escalating?" "Unauthorized access to restricted areas, midnight armory visits, off-book comms, meetings with men who don't exist in visitor logs," Sarah recited calmly. 3 weeks ago, I watched Townsend shake hands with Serbian arms dealers at the East Perimeter maintenance shed. No one logged them in." Henderson leaned back, staring at her like she'd just revealed another life. "And you saw this as a cook?" Sarah's smile was sharp this time. "Let's say I've been trained to notice patterns." Silence stretched. The hum of the jammer filled the air. Henderson finally spoke. You're not CIA anymore. I'm a wife, she said simply. Then, after a pause, and an analyst, old habits die hard. The colonel turned to John again. You just happened to arrive today, just happened to walk in when Townsend laid hands on her. She called me last night, John said. I was already on a flight from Amman. Amman? Henderson raised a brow. Not exactly a tourist spot these days. John said nothing. Henderson read the silence for what it was. His expression hardened. This isn't just bullying. You're telling me Townsend and Carter are stealing weapons, selling them. Worse, John replied quietly. They're channeling them to groups with goals, not just black market sales, terrorist networks, domestic and international. The words landed like stone. Henderson rose, packing toward the window. Outside, Fort Braxton moved on PT formations, marching cadences, soldiers in perfect rows, young men and women who trusted the system they served. Henderson's jaw tightened. You realize what you're suggesting, treason inside command. If I'm wrong about this, it ends my career. If I'm right. If you're right, Sarah cut in, and you stay silent, it ends lives. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Henderson turned back slowly. He studied them both again, weighing truth against fear. Finally, he exhaled. What do you need? For the next hour, the office became a war room. Henderson gave schedules, security protocols, intel on Carter's movements. John gave little in return, only enough to build trust, never too much. Sarah filled gaps with detail, laying out a picture of a conspiracy too sharp to ignore. At the end, Henderson sat heavily in his chair. You know, showing your face today accelerates their timeline. They'll move fast now. John nodded once. We're counting on it. Pressure makes mistakes. It also makes danger, Henderson warned. His gaze shifted to Sarah. Townsend won't let this stand. He'll come after you. Sarah's eyes didn't waver. Let him try. For a moment, Henderson just looked at her, this woman who had been dismissed as a cook hours ago. Then he shook his head slowly. You're not just the wife, are you? Sarah smiled faintly. I'm exactly what I appear to be, a wife who makes excellent pot roast. The colonel snorted. Right, and I'm just a security officer who happened to spend 30 years in military intelligence. They all knew better. When John and Sarah left the office, the sun was setting over Fort Braxton. Long shadows stretched across the parade ground. Soldiers moved in crisp lines, rifles at their shoulders, believing in the integrity of those above them. Sarah felt the bruise on her cheek as she walked. The sting was almost gone, but the insult remained. In their temporary housing, they didn't waste time. John locked the door. Sarah checked the windows. Both moved with the fluid efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times. Sweep for bugs. Check blind spots. Only when the room was secure did they relax. Sarah touched her cheek again, softer this time. That complicates things. It was always going to get complicated, John replied, pulling a secure satellite phone from his bag. She didn't ask who he was calling. She already knew. Package compromised, he said quietly after the encryption protocol. Timeline accelerated. Request support assets. He listened, then ended with, ghost out. Sarah pulled up surveillance photos from her phone. Townsend's men met with Serbian arms dealers 3 times in the last month. I've identified 2, former military, both tied to 3 different terror organizations. John studied the screen. Henderson was right. Our appearance will force their hand. Sarah's eyes hardened. Good. I'm tired of serving pot roast to traitors. John almost smiled. Almost. But outside, under the oak tree east of their quarters, a man in shadow crouched, watching through binoculars. Corporal Ryan Cooper. Townsend's orders clear. Surveillance only. Assess who the Millers really were. Cooper thought he was the predator. He didn't know that John had already seen him. We have company, John said from the darkened window. Sarah didn't look up from the desk. Townsend. Cooper, east side. Assessment. Just watching, Not yet ready to move. Sarah made a note on her tablet. Good, let them waste their time. John lingered at the window, his eyes never leaving the shadows where Cooper crouched. Then he turned back toward his wife, his partner, the only person who knew every piece of him. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Her lips curved into a rare smile. 8 months of meatloaf and lieutenants complaining about girlfriends. It's nice to use my real skill set again. John chuckled softly, just like old times. No, she corrected, closing her tablet. Better. This time we're on the same side from the beginning. And in the quiet that followed, both knew the game had started. What none of them knew was how far it reached, how high. Because that night, in an office gilded with power, Colonel Carter placed a secure call to a voice known only as Triton. There may be a complication, Carter said tightly. Miller's husband showed up. There was an incident with Townsend. The voice on the other end was cold. Identify him, find his weakness. If he's a problem, remove him. And the woman, no loose ends. Carter ended the call, unaware that every word had been intercepted by an intelligence team 3 miles from the base. The board was set, the players were moving. And at the center of it all, a woman with a fatting bruise and eyes like ice prepared for a mission she never asked for, but could no longer refuse. Why did the glass shatter before the first bullet came? Sarah was setting dinner on the small government-issued table when it happened. One moment, the room hummed with quiet routine silverware, the faint clink of plates, John's low voice reviewing the adjusted plan. The next, the living room window exploded inward. A metallic object landed on the carpet with a hollow clatter. Flashbang. John didn't hesitate. He tackled her to the floor as white light ripped through the room, a thunderclap of sound that swallowed thought. Their ears rang, their eyes burned, but training filled the gaps. Roll left, find cover, weapons up. Glass rained down. Then came the gunfire. Shards of wood and plaster burst from the walls as bullets chewed through government housing like paper. Sarah slid behind the couch, fingers moving by instinct. Her hand found the pistol taped beneath the coffee table, a weapon no inspection had ever seen. She chambered around, steadying her breathing, letting muscle memory override fear. John crawled to the kitchen, moving low, his silhouette vanishing between flashes of gunfire. Rear exits covered, he called, calm despite the chaos. East side, Sarah answered, voice clipped professional. The barrage intensified. Whoever came tonight wasn't sending a warning. This was meant to erase them. Sarah's chest ached with a familiar conflict. She had lived years analyzing threats from behind screens, safe houses, and briefing rooms. But the field was different. The field was chaos and instinct. And yet, here she was, back in it, heart pounding in rhythm with the shots. John peeked through the kitchen blinds. One hostile covering the alley, Peterson, his silhouette clear against the lamplight. John made a noise in the living room, loud enough to draw attention. Peterson shifted focus, rifle angled toward the front. That was the opening. Sarah slipped out the kitchen door, body hugging the siding. Every step was measured. She closed the distance in silence. Peterson never saw her coming. One clean chokehold, controlled descent. He was unconscious before his rifle touched the ground. She exhaled through her nose, steadying herself. She'd promised herself, promised John, that she'd left this world behind. But her hands hadn't forgotten. Clear, she whispered. John joined her seconds later, already scanning the shadows. Together, they moved through the narrow passage toward the storage sheds, slipping past cones of security light. Behind them, the house still shuddered under gunfire. Townsend's men were wasting ammunition on ghosts. 2 blocks away, a sedan waited in the darkness. A fallback plan years in the making. John drove while Sarah kept her pistol ready, eyes sharp for tails. It wasn't until the base perimeter was behind them that Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was tight but not broken. That was Townsend's style. No, John agreed, his knuckles flexed against the wheel. Too coordinated, too clean, that was Carter. Sarah stared out the window, the bruise on her cheek catching moonlight. And whoever Carter answers to. For a moment the car was silent, just the hum of the tires and the weight of realization. This wasn't just about one abusive captain or his crooked superior. It was higher, deeper, something vast. Her chest tightened with both fear and fury. She spent 8 months playing the role of the harmless cook, endured whispers, endured slaps, endured being underestimated because it let her see what others missed. But tonight they'd tried to erase her, erase John, erase the truth. That patience was gone. John reached for the secure comm in the glove box. His voice was steel when he spoke. Full mobilization, emergency protocols, Alpha rally in 3 hours. Sarah watched him in profile, the calm precision of his movements, the unflinching way he prepared for what was coming. This was the man they called Ghost. The man who vanished into hostile cities and came back with secrets nations had killed to keep. And yet when he glanced at her, his eyes softened. She wasn't just his partner in this mission. She was his anchor. Her tablet buzzed with a message. Henderson, base on lockdown. Official story, terrorists tried to infiltrate officer housing. Convenient lie, convenient cover. She showed John the update, and the depot inventory been changed. HIMARS components listed as transferred for maintenance. Transferred, John echoed, his jaw clenched. They're moving tonight. Sarah leaned back, her pulse steadying as analysis took over. Then we intercept tonight, only chance. Her voice trembled just once when she added, They wanted me on my knees, John, scrubbing glass off the floor. That's what Townsend wanted. That's what Carter wanted. John didn't look away from the road. They wanted you small. Sarah nodded. They'll regret not finishing it tonight. The farmhouse safe house stood 30 miles away, hidden by woods and forgotten roads. To any passerby, it was just another relic of rural neglect. But inside, its walls had seen more clandestine planning than most command centers. By the time they arrived, the place was alive. Maps spread across the table, radios humming, old ghosts walking back into the light. Jack Reynolds, Miguel Ortiz, Doc Harris, Sam Davis, men with ordinary lives now, carpenters and doctors and engineers, but once they had been something else, something whispered about in places without names, operators who changed wars without leaving footprints. Sarah recognized them all. She had briefed them years ago from windowless rooms, watched their missions unfold through green-tinted feeds. But seeing them now, reassembled after so many years, she felt the gravity settle in her chest. It meant the threat was bigger than even she imagined. Been a while, Ghost, Jack said simply, clasping John's hand. No ceremony, no explanation, just the kind of bond forged in places no one wrote down. John nodded once, too long, Spectre. Introductions were brief. Sarah felt their eyes on her, weighing her place. She didn't flinch. She'd earned her seat, not because she was John's wife, because she had seen the patterns no one else wanted to admit. She briefed them with clinical precision. 3 unmarked trucks, HIMARS launcher components. Destination is listed as Fort Benning. That's cover. Real destination is a private airfield. Secondary route likely maritime. Miguel's brow furrowed, so they split shipments. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. Reduce risk, create noise, harder to track. Doc shook his head slowly. And if even one system makes it through. No one answered. They didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew what a HIMARS in the wrong hands could do. Sam's fingers flew across a keyboard. Convoy scheduled for 0200. 3 trucks, 2 security vehicles, 15 personnel, heavy armament, Townsend leading. John leaned over the map, voice low. We hit them at the choke point, minimum force. Maximum intel, document everything. "And if they fire first?" Jack asked, his tone flat. John's eyes were cold when they lifted. "Then we finish it." Sarah's chest tightened again, but not from fear, from the weight of it. These weren't plans scribbled on briefing boards. This was real. This was the line where lives would be lost. She met John's gaze, saw in it the same question he'd asked 1,000 times in silence. "Are you ready?" She nodded once, and whispered back what she had whispered in Damascus, in safe houses, in rooms lit only by dying bulbs. Always. Why had they chosen the choke point that hugged the river like a vein? The convoy moved faster than the official schedule said it would. John saw that on his tablet, anomalies in GPS pings, contrails in camera feeds, men shifting positions in vehicles the way predators adjust posture before an ambush. They had expected speed. They had not expected boldness. That meant desperation, or competence. Both were dangerous. They parked half a mile from the chosen ridge, engines cut, breath held. Night smelled of wet earth and diesel. The team split with the smooth choreography of people who had rehearsed this in quieter rooms and bloodier places. Jack took long range. Doc and Sam took overwatch. Miguel prepared the disables. Sarah settled into the surveillance nest, satellite uplink whispering data into her ear like an old friend. She felt something tight and honest inside her chest, pride, like a low-burning ember. It surprised her. She hadn't thought of pride in a long time, not the kind that wasn't ashamed. She was determined, too, the way a woman is when she has given patience a chance and found it wasted. It steadied her hands over the controls as she adjusted the camera zoom, framing the convoy against a ribbon of black water. "Convoy in sight," Sam whispered through the encrypted channel. His voice sounded like a man who had stayed up too many nights watching others sleep. 3 transport trucks, 2 security vehicles. Townsend in the lead security vehicle. John's jaw tightened. "Confirm cargo manifests visually." Jack's scope answered. Crates, long cases, tarpaulins tied down. Not the banal shapes of maintenance gear. The geometry fit the bill, targeting arrays, cooling packs, launcher segments. The men didn't appear like regular drivers. They moved like professional couriers. "We keep this clean," John said softly. "Document first. If it goes hot, we pivot. No heroics. No casualties if we can avoid it." Sarah heard the moral in his command like a bell tolling. The mission was about truth in custody, evidence that could nail a vice admiral and take a chain of corruption apart. But the truth sometimes required bodies to be moved. That reality sat heavy in her, and for the first time in months, the sentimental edges of her earlier life, recipes, smiles, small domestic kindnesses, felt fragile in the grip of something hard and necessary. Jack marked positions. "I have visual on the front security truck. 2 men dismounted, scanning." His voice was steady but clipped with the sort of focus that could quiet a scream. Miguel crouched lower and pulled from his kit a skinny device that looked like a metal flute, electronic countermeasure. He checked the angle, the weave of the road, how the trees would swallow sound. The plan was surgical. Disable the convoy's GPS and comms, isolate the primary truck, force a stop at the choke point, document faces and manifest, then let the legal machinery, if it would move, do the rest. They had practiced versions of this in war zones. This was cleaner, civilian roads, legal shade. Yet there was something profane about intercepting a military shipment on a quiet county road. It made Sarah's stomach tighten with a guilt she couldn't place. She pushed it down and focused instead on the live feed, the faces at the windows, the posture of men with guns. Townsend's men were professional, but they carried a swagger like a man who believed complicity made him invincible. That belief could be broken. It had been broken before in rooms that smelled worse than this one, but breaking it ahead of the law required evidence and timing. "Go," John breathed. Sam looped the nearest traffic camera feed, filled the convoy's digital footprint with a blind spot for a 3-minute window. In the silence that followed, the convoy slowed as if sensing the trap, an instinct for life that had nothing to do with right or wrong. The lead truck hugged the road's edge, a crate-laden beast breathing through diesel. Jack's voice, engage range, eyes open. From the tree line, Jack's rifle hummed like a promise. One careful shot toppled a rear tire on the last security vehicle, the sound muffled in the woods but precise. The truck fishtailed and came to a grinding stop. It was small, method over mayhem, but it was enough. The convoy halted. Men spilled out, rifles employed without ceremony. Headlamps carved the night. Townsend stepped down, face a map of rage. The hiss of breath from Townsend's men cut the air. Peterson moved like someone who had rehearsed this tension. "Captain Townsend, this stop is for inspection," John said on the open channel, pretending to be an authority that he was not. The voice was smooth, iron-coated. He sounded ordinary, procedural, legal. That lie was one of the least immoral things they would tell that night. It worked. Townsend barked orders. Men fanned out, weapons raised. The moral grayness of their operation pressed against Sarah's ribs like a second heartbeat. They were deceiving soldiers, soldiers who might have been blackmailed, corrupted, conscripted into silence. Some of these men could be coerced into changing sides with the right evidence. Some could be broken. It didn't excuse their actions. It only complicated them. "Get us faces," John ordered. "High-raise, wide-angle, capture the paperwork." Sarah's hands were a blur. The camera ate into the night and spit out faces, cheeks, caps, tattoos, the small details that betray identity. She fed the images through facial recognition, cross-referencing databases that had no business speaking to each other. Names came up like ghosts, former contractors, ex-special operators spotted in regions that had no use for them when they were alive. The list was ugly. Men who had been paid to forget oaths. Townsend moved with a certain arrogance toward the primary load. He lifted a tarp, glanced inside, then slammed it back down. His eyes landed on the tree line, on the needle-sharp glint that would announce a rifle's presence. He didn't see Jack. He didn't see Sam's passive monitor. He saw the night as he wanted it. That hubris would cost him. "Take the manifest," John said, breath held like a hostage. Miguel dropped from cover in one silent motion, ghosting into the road and toward the middle truck. He had a rope, a magnetized clamp, tools to get an honest look without burning the cargo. He moved like a man who had a different ledger inside his skull where lives and objectives were balanced. A torchlight swung toward him. A shout cracked. Men swung weapons. Night tore open. Gunfire bloomed like a wound in the dark. The first shots were not accurate. They were angry, hurried, fired by people who had something to hide rather than something to defend. Miguel dove behind a truck. Sam frantically fed more loops into the camera feeds to buy time. Jack dropped to his stomach and returned precise. Non-lethal suppression fire meant to scare but not kill, the calculus of their moral code. Intimidate, not exterminate. That code was a brittle thing, and it shattered soundlessly. Peterson moved like a viper toward Miguel, the barrel of his weapon catching moonlight. John saw the movement and made a choice in a heartbeat that was not heroic so much as necessary. He moved across open road, a silhouette between two lights, and slammed into Peterson in a controlled throw that used his weight and momentum to pin the man while Jack provided cover. The scuffle was brutal and personal. Peterson smelled of cheap beer and worse things, the arrogance of men who believed they were anonymous. John's knuckles found a tender place in Peterson's jaw. The man crumpled like someone who had finally met an honest hand. Townsend fired a shot toward the ridge. It screamed past Jack's ear and embedded itself in the trunk of a cedar. A soldier 4 months from retirement flinched, his morality fracturing as he realized the legal shield he had trusted was not armored. "Document," John screamed to them over the noise. "Get the manifest, get faces, keep recording." His voice was a strip of steel around the chaos. Sarah's camera recorded everything. The men, the punches, the crumpled manifest as Miguel wrested it free with shoving hands and sweat. She felt her own breath shorten, terror braided with fierce resolve. In that moment she felt proud, a raw, burning pride that was not about violence but about standing where the cowardly had tried to erase what was true. The firefight stopped as quickly as it had begun, because someone in a government office had enough weight to insist on brakes. Henderson's voice, crisp and authoritative over the encrypted channel, "Stand down, federal oversight activating, awaiting clearance." His intervention was a reminder of the slender thread between justice and vengeance. Townsend spat curses and retreated to his convoy, his bravado intact because he preferred animal postures over admission. He barked into a radio that cracked and sparked. "They attacked us, civilians, foreign agents." The excuses were old and tired. They had what they needed: faces, manifest pages with serial numbers, timestamps burned into storage. Jack's scope had taken thermal profiles showing which crates contained dense electronics and which were ballast. Sam had intercepted radio chatter, disclosing the rendezvous point at a private marina and the time to leave, a new thread that led to a larger knot in the web. In the rear, Peterson tried to scramble for a weapon that no longer lay where he'd expected, his hands closed on air. John held him on the ground with a controlled, unglamorous force that said nothing about triumph, everything about cold necessity. He looked down at the man and felt something like pity, brief, unimportant, then gone. "We don't hunt men," John said finally, soft enough only the team could hear. "We hunt the crime." Sarah wiped sweat from her upper lip and tasted smoke on the air. She felt tired in a way that vibrated under the skin. She also felt something steadier: hope. They had what they needed to blow open a scandal. They had evidence that could not be swept away by salutes and office calls. But hope was fragile. It required more proof, more legal hands keen and uncompromised. They packed what they had fast, efficient as surgeons finishing a morning's work. The team exfiltrated, ghosts slipping into the night with pockets full of truth. In the car, John finally let out a breath that had not been his earlier. Sarah watched him in the rear view like someone observing a man who had been unmade by war and remade by duty. "Did we get enough?" she asked, voice small. John's reply was not a promise, it was a resolve, enough to begin. They drove away while the road behind them filled with blue lights and questions. The county police would take statements. Soldiers would tell different stories at the base. But the photographs and serial numbers were digital witnesses that would not forget. In the darkness, as the river swallowed taillights, an uncomfortable thought found her. Evidence could start an avalanche, but it could also make powerful men desperate. And desperate men acted like hurricanes. They took everything in their path. She thought of the bruise on her cheek and the line of Townsend's face softening with rage. She imagined Vice Admiral Harrington, Triton, sitting behind mahogany and phone lines, deciding if he would use influence or exposure to survive. The moral weight of it sat heavy between her shoulders like armor that neither warmed nor comforted. At the safe house, Doc set the manifest in a small lockbox and sealed it with deliberate hands. "Chain of custody," he recited like a prayer. Jack stirred coffee and watched the door, his face older than his years. "This is bigger than we thought," he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. Determined, proud, and quietly afraid, she sat down at the table and touched the bruise again. For the first time that night she felt the whisper that would become the shape of everything to come. Dignity did not beg. Dignity documented. Why was the marina so quiet when the convoy arrived? The water lay black under the moon, a mirror that held its breath. Shipping containers lined the docks like silent witnesses. Rusted cranes towered overhead, motionless in the still night. A place built for noise, for shouting men and grinding engines, now carried only silence. Too much silence. Sarah crouched behind a stack of containers, her ear pressed to the headset. Every sound sharpened, her own breath, the faint clink of a rifle strap shifting, the murmur of distant voices. She had spent years studying signals, interpreting whispers through static. Tonight, every whisper felt like a blade pressed close. John crouched beside her, steady as stone. His eyes scanned the open dockyard, his hand resting on the rifle across his lap. "Convoy's late," he murmured. "Or early," Sarah countered. Her gut twisted with that subtle dread, an analyst's intuition. Pattern spoke, and this pattern was wrong. Maybe they rerouted. "No," John said quietly. "They want to be seen, just not by who they told." That gnawed at her. Seen by who? A low rumble answered. Headlights cut across the blacktop, painting long shadows that crawled over the containers. 3 trucks rolled in, guarded by 2 SUVs, just as the intel predicted. Except, "Where Townsend?" Sarah whispered. The lead SUV door opened. Not Townsend, a stranger, stocky, shaven head, civilian clothes but military boots. He moved like a man used to command. Miguel's voice came through the comms from his position across the dock. "Not on roster. Whoever he is, he's running the show tonight." John's face hardened. "Not Townsend, which means—" "They already know," Sarah finished. "The evidence they'd stolen, the convoy they'd intercepted, word had traveled. The operation was changing, adapting." And then she saw him. Colonel Carter. He stepped out from the second SUV, his presence colder than the night air. He didn't glance at the cargo, didn't bark orders. He just lit a cigarette and scanned the dock, as though daring anyone to watch. Sarah's pulse quickened. She hadn't realized she was holding her breath until she felt the ache in her chest. This was no longer about Townsend's corruption. This was Carter's, and above him, Triton. But the dock wasn't just Carter's stage. Another vehicle appeared, sleek, black, windows tinted. It rolled to a stop near the water's edge. The man who stepped out didn't look military at all. Suit, polished shoes, briefcase. He moved with the kind of confidence that didn't need weapons. Sarah whispered into the mic, "That's no soldier." John's jaw tightened. "That's the buyer." The suited man shook Carter's hand, formal, cold. Then he tapped the briefcase. 2 of Carter's men rolled one of the crates forward. Latches opened. Inside, the glow of control systems. HIMARS fire control modules. Not launchers, not missiles, but brains, the part that made the system deadly. Sarah felt her chest constrict. In the wrong hands, those modules were the difference between safety and chaos. 1 could cripple a city. 2 could arm a movement. The buyer smiled thinly. His men began scanning the equipment. Carter smoked, watching with a predator's patience. "Get the evidence," John said softly. Sarah lifted the camera. Each click was a cut into the night. Faces, crates, serial numbers, the handshake, the briefcase. Everything tied together, a chain no court could ignore. But her hands trembled just slightly. Because the silence at the marina wasn't just emptiness. It was a trap. Her headset crackled, Jack's voice tense. "Heat signatures on the West Ridge, too many, we're compromised." Miguel hissed, "They knew, they're baiting us." John didn't flinch. "Hold positions, document, don't fire unless fired on." Sarah's stomach tightened. She remembered the glass shattering in their house, the flashbang rolling across the floor. She remembered the sound of bullets chewing plaster. And she remembered the look in Carter's eyes then, the arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. Now Carter's eyes swept the ridge, paused, his lips curved in a thin smile. He exhaled smoke, flicked the cigarette to the ground, and raised his hand. Gunfire erupted. The ridge lit up in muzzle flashes. Bullets tore into the containers, sparks flying, steel shrieking. Jack's voice came through, calm even as he fired back. Engaged, multiple tangos, suppressive only. Sarah ducked low, camera clutched to her chest. Her heart slammed in her ribs. This wasn't surveillance anymore. This was war. John's voice was steel. "Exfil routes now." Sam called out, "East dock clear, boat secured, 2 minutes to get there." John grabbed Sarah's arm. "Move." They ran, weaving through containers as bullets cracked overhead. Sarah's mind raced as fast as her legs. What if they lost the footage? What if Carter got away clean? What if Henderson never got the proof? Her foot caught on broken concrete. She stumbled, slammed hard into the ground. The camera skittered out of her hands. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that single object sliding across the blacktop. Evidence, proof, everything. Bullets sparked around it. "Sarah," John's voice was sharp, desperate. She crawled, fingers outstretched, heart pounding. She grabbed the camera just as a round punched into the asphalt inches away. Heat seared her skin. She rolled, gasping, and John pulled her up, dragging her into cover. "Got it," she choked out. His eyes locked on hers. Relief, fierce, protective relief, but also pride. They reached the dock. Sam's boat waited, engine sputtering low. The team piled in, bullets chasing them as they shoved off into the black water. The marina shrank behind them, a hive of shouting men and flashing muzzles. Carter's voice carried across the night, fury breaking his composure. "Find them, bring me Miller." Sarah clutched the camera to her chest. Every breath burned. Her hands shook. She wasn't a soldier, she wasn't supposed to be here, and yet she was, alive, holding the truth they needed. John wrapped an arm around her shoulders as the boat cut through the river. "You did it," he said softly. Her throat tightened. The fear, the adrenaline, the weight of it all pressed against her. She wanted to cry, but she wouldn't. Not yet. Not while Carter's voice still echoed. She swallowed hard. "We only bought time, he won't stop." John didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the dark horizon. Because she was right, Carter wasn't finished. And Triton hadn't even shown his face yet. Why did Henderson hesitate before answering the phone? The colonel sat in his office long past midnight, blinds drawn, light dimmed to a single desk lamp. His hand hovered over the ringing secure line. The sound was sharp, insistent, cutting into the quiet. He had faced mortar fire with less hesitation. When he finally picked it up, the voice was already there, smooth, confident, cold. "Triton." Henderson closed his eyes for a second. That name was a ghost from files he wasn't supposed to have read, whispered through channels he was supposed to have ignored. "Sir." The voice continued. "I'm told there was an incident at Braxton, a convoy intercepted, cargo exposed, and Miller involved." Henderson's grip tightened on the receiver. "I don't know how Miller fits into this, but the reports of an attack are inconsistent." "Inconsistent," Triton repeated, as though tasting the word. "Colonel, you and I both know what happens to men who fail to deliver consistency." Henderson stared at the wall, a scarred patch of paint, faint but visible where an old picture had hung. His late wife, gone 3 years, that emptiness weighed on him now. "Understood." "Good," Triton said softly. "Then you will contain this. Carter is useful but not indispensable. Townsend is a liability. The woman is dangerous. Remove her, quietly. Miller I will handle personally." The line went dead. Henderson sat there, the silence heavier than before. His reflection in the darkened window looked older than he felt. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. He had choices, none of them safe. Sarah's hand still shook hours later. Not visibly, she had mastered composure, but deep in the muscles, in the memory of crawling for that camera under fire. She sat at the safe house table, replaying footage on her laptop. Crates, faces, Carter, the buyer, everything captured. Proof. And yet, watching it, she felt a crack in herself. That flicker of doubt, what if it's not enough? Her mind replayed Carter's shout. "Bring me Miller." He hadn't meant John, he'd meant her, the cook, the invisible one, and now he knew she wasn't invisible at all. John leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her. "You did good." She forced a smile, good enough to make them furious. "That's the point." She looked up at him, eyes tired. "You think Henderson can hold the line?" John didn't answer right away. He walked over, pulled up a chair beside her. "He's a soldier. He'll do what soldiers do." Sarah caught the edge in his voice. "Which is?" Follow orders until the orders break him. Her throat tightened, and if Triton gives the orders. John's silence was answer enough. For a long moment, the only sound was the laptop fan. Sarah leaned back, pressing her palms against her face. She wasn't broken. Not yet. But she was tired of being the piece they underestimated, tired of being dismissed until the moment she became the threat. She lowered her hands. We go public. John frowned. Not yet. Why not? We have faces. Crates, Carter, it's all here. And no one will believe it without context, John said calmly. The system protects itself. If we release it now, they'll spin it as a rogue op, civilians interfering, doctored footage. They'll bury us before the truth breathes. Her chest ached with frustration. So what then? Wait until Carter has us killed, until Triton finds us. John's hand found hers, firm, grounding. We hit again, harder, one more strike, something they can't bury. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand peace, safety, escape. But deep down she knew he was right. Truth without weight was just rumor. They needed weight, and that meant risk. She exhaled slow, then we end it. Across town, Carter poured whiskey into a glass that had cost more than a private's monthly pay. His hands were steady. His temper was not. The Marina debacle had humiliated him, but humiliation was temporary. Power was not. He dialed a number. Townsend, I need leverage. The Millers are ghosts. Find their past, find their weakness. The woman is the key. Break her and he will follow. Townsend's laugh was cruel, eager, with pleasure. Carter ended the call and looked out the window at the base lights in the distance. Soldiers moved like ants under floodlamps, obedient, unknowing. He smirked. They had no idea the hands that moved their strings. At the safe house, Jack cleaned his rifle with slow, practiced motions. Doc checked bandages, Miguel reloaded magazines, Sam reconfigured comms. They worked in silence, each man carrying his own ghosts. Sarah moved among them not as an outsider anymore but as part of the team. She checked maps, recalibrated routes, fed data into Sam's systems. No one questioned her. Not now, not after the Marina. Still, she felt their eyes sometimes, measuring, respect mixed with something else, maybe disbelief that the cook had become their analyst, their strategist. She caught Miguel watching her and raised a brow. Something on your mind? He shook his head. Just reminds me of Aleppo. A woman there ran intel networks right under everyone's nose. No one noticed her either, until it was too late. Sarah half smiled. Invisible has its advantages. Miguel nodded, until it doesn't. The words lingered. She tucked them away, knowing they were true. Her invisibility was gone now. She was a target. Later, when the others slept in shifts, Sarah stepped outside. The night air was cool, carrying the smell of pine and damp earth. She tilted her head back, staring at the stars. Distant, untouchable. Her mind replayed the moment she'd crawled across asphalt, bullets screaming around her, fingers clawing for the camera. The moment she refused to let go. That wasn't training. That wasn't duty. That was something deeper. Pride, dignity, rage. And fear. She admitted it now, alone in the night. She was afraid. Afraid not of death, but of erasure. Afraid of being remembered as a cook who stayed silent while men like Carter stole the future. Afraid of being another woman no one believed until it was too late. Her hands clenched. Not anymore. John joined her quietly, his presence steady. For a while they said nothing. Then he asked, "What are you thinking?" She exhaled, watching her breath fade into the dark. That if they want me invisible, I'll make sure the whole world sees instead. He nodded once, then we give them no place to hide. She looked at him, her partner, her anchor. And in that moment, despite the fear, despite the weight of what was coming, she felt something unexpected. Hope. Because sometimes, the only way to fight the shadows was to light a fire so bright it couldn't be ignored. At dawn, Henderson sat alone, Carter's words still burning in his ears. Remove her. Quietly. He poured black coffee into a chipped mug, staring at the rising sun. He could follow orders. He could preserve his career. Or he could remember what he once was. A soldier. He reached for his secure line. And for the first time in years, Henderson chose not to call his superior. He called his conscience. "Ghost," he said when John answered. "They're coming for her. Orders straight from Triton. I can't stop it, but I can give you time." There was silence on the other end. Then John's steady voice. "That's all we need." Why was the knock so soft, almost polite, before the door exploded? Sarah had been standing at the safe house sink, rinsing a mug, the steam of instant coffee rising around her. The others were scattered in the living room, quiet, tired, preparing for another night of planning. John was cleaning his weapon at the table. For a brief moment it almost felt normal, like the rhythm of ordinary life had returned, like the nightmare outside couldn't touch them. Then came the knock, 3 light taps, too light. Sarah froze. John's head lifted instantly, eyes narrowing. Jack reached for his rifle. Miguel mouthed a single word, "Trap." The explosion came half a second later. The door splintered inward, a thunderclap of wood and metal. Shouts followed, boots slamming against hardwood, red lasers slicing through the air. "Down, down, everyone down." Sarah dove behind the counter as gunfire erupted. The safe house turned into a cage of chaos, plaster flying, furniture splintering, smoke curling thick. Her ears rang. The mug she had been holding shattered on the floor, coffee mixing with shards. A domestic moment erased in fire. Townsend's voice cut through the smoke. "Get the woman alive, kill the rest." Her stomach dropped. It was John he wanted. It wasn't the team, it was her. John returned fire, every shot precise, controlled. Jack covered the windows. Miguel lobbed smoke grenades that filled the room with choking gray. But they were outnumbered, heavily. Shadows moved through the fog, men in tactical gear, black masks, rifles raised. Sarah crawled toward the back door, camera bag clutched tight against her chest. But the smoke betrayed her, curling around her outline. A figure lunged, grabbing her arm. She fought. Instinct took over. Elbow to his ribs, heel to his shin. He staggered but didn't let go. Another man joined, wrenching her wrist. Pain shot through her arm as the bag slipped free. "No," she gasped, clawing at it, but they dragged her back. John saw. His eyes locked on hers through the chaos, fury and fear burning together. He surged forward, but another wave of attackers pressed him down. Bullets screamed overhead. A flashbang detonated. Sarah's vision went white, sound vanishing into a ringing void. When the world returned, she was outside, thrown into the dirt, her wrists bound with zip ties. The night air was sharp, cutting into her lungs. A black van idled nearby, doors open like a waiting mouth. Townsend loomed above her, his grin jagged in the flickering light. "Not so invisible now, are you, Cook?" Her chest heaved. She wanted to spit in his face, but her throat was dry, cracked from smoke. So she stared instead, silent, unbroken. His smirk faltered at her defiance. He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Don't worry. We'll make sure your husband watches every second before you disappear." The words should have broken her. Instead, something inside her hardened. She whispered, low, steady, "You'll regret touching me." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, doubt, maybe fear. He shoved her toward the van. And then the night erupted again. Gunfire, precise, surgical. Townsend's men dropped one by one, their shouts twisting into panic. The red beam of Jack's scope cut through the dark, a ghost's hand guiding every shot. Miguel's rifle cracked from the tree line. Sam triggered a drone overhead, its floodlight blinding the ambushers. John stormed through the chaos, a shadow turned fury. He cut through the attackers with silent precision, every motion economical, deadly. His eyes found Sarah, and for a second the world narrowed to that, her bound hands, his relentless stride, the unspoken vow between them. Townsend cursed, dragging Sarah upright as a shield. his pistol pressed cold against her temple. "Back off, Miller, or she dies right here." John stopped. The team froze. Smoke curled between them. The river shimmered faintly behind the van. For a heartbeat, everything hung on the edge. Sarah felt the gun against her head. She felt her heart pounding like a drum. Fear surged, but so did something else. Defiance. She met John's eyes, and without a word she shifted her weight, just enough. Townsend didn't notice until it was too late. She stomped hard on his foot, twisted her head sideways, and dropped. The pistol barked, loud, sharp, but the round sailed into the night. John moved in that heartbeat. One shot. Clean. Townsend staggered, the weapon falling from his hand, his body collapsing into the dirt. The silence after was deafening. Smoke hung heavy. The van idled, its engine still growling. The men who had stormed the safe house lay scattered, groaning or still. John rushed forward, slicing Sarah's bonds with his knife. His hands shook just slightly as he pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. His breath was rough, ragged. "You okay?" Her chest heaved. She was trembling now, not from weakness but from the aftermath, from the weight of what almost was. She nodded, though her throat ached too much to speak. Behind them, Jack's voice cut in. "We need to move. Reinforcements will be here any minute." Miguel checked Townsend's body, shaking his head. "Dead. He won't be giving orders again." Sarah stared at the fallen captain. Hours ago he had slapped her in a mess hall, certain she was small. Now he lay in the dirt, undone by the very silence he mocked. She felt no triumph, only a cold, quiet justice. John touched her cheek, thumb brushing the faint bruise still visible there. "You're stronger than they'll ever understand." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. "I wasn't afraid of dying," she whispered. "I was afraid they'd erase me, make me nothing." John's hand tightened on hers. "They can't, not while you fight." The team loaded into the van, abandoning the ruined safe house. As the headlights cut through the trees, Sarah sat pressed against John, her body exhausted, her mind raw. She closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the road steady her breathing. But she knew it wasn't over. Townsend was gone, but Carter remained, and Triton still watched from the shadows. Somewhere behind glass and power, he would hear of Townsend's death, and he would decide what to do with the woman who refused to be erased. For the first time, Sarah almost hoped he would come, because she was done running. Why did Triton finally step out of the shadows? The answer came 2 nights later in a building that looked too polished, too untouchable for the kind of dirt it hid. Washington, marble floors, tall windows, the kind of place where truth was rewritten behind closed doors. Sarah stood in the hallway, her reflection caught in the glass pane of a door marked restricted access. Her hair was pulled back, her bruise fatting, her shoulders squared. She looked almost ordinary, but she knew better. She wasn't invisible anymore. John was beside her, silent, steady. The team was split, Jack and Miguel watching the street outside, Doc and Sam running interference through hacked feeds and scrambled radios. This was it, the last step. Inside that room, Carter waited, and above him, Triton. Henderson had given them the opening. He'd burned his own career to leak the location of the meeting, Carter's private handoff to his superior. The evidence Sarah had bled for wasn't enough on its own, but catching them together, that would tip the balance. John opened the door. The room was all polished oak and leather chairs, a conference table wide enough to drown truth in formality. Carter sat at one end, papers neatly stacked, a glass of bourbon sweating beside him. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with recognition when he saw Sarah. "You should be dead," he said simply. "People keep underestimating me," she replied. Then the other man turned, Triton. Not a code name, not a phantom, just a man in a tailored suit, silver hair combed back, eyes sharp as glass. He didn't rise, didn't flinch, he simply smiled. "So," he said softly, "the cook who wasn't a cook, the ghost who never stays buried, I should have expected this." Sarah studied him, this figure who had ordered her erased like she was nothing. She expected menace, rage, arrogance. What she found instead was something colder: certainty. He believed in his power the way men believe in gravity. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was steady, though her chest trembled inside. "Why betray the people who trusted you? Why sell weapons that protect us to men who'd burn cities with them?" Triton's smile widened. "Because loyalty is a story for children. Power is the only truth adults live by." Her stomach tightened, not because of the words but because of how easily he said them. No shame, no hesitation, just truth in his voice. Carter shifted, restless. "Sir, they have evidence. We need to move." "Quiet, Carter." Triton's voice was silk and steel. "If they had evidence strong enough to move against me, we'd already be in handcuffs. But here we are, in my office, in my city. You came to me, not the other way around. That tells me you're still weak, still playing." John's hand hovered near his weapon, eyes never leaving Triton. "We're done playing." Sarah set the camera on the table, the same one she'd crawled across asphalt to save. She powered it up, screen glowing. Images filled the display: faces, crates, serial numbers, the buyer at the marina, Carter's handshake, every link in the chain. Triton's eyes flicked to it. For the first time the smile cracked, not much, but enough. "You think that will matter?" he asked. "Do you know how many men like me own judges, own generals, own the ink in the pens that sign orders? Evidence is paper, power is fire, and fire burns paper." Sarah's throat was dry, but she leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Then we don't give it to paper, we give it to people, all of it, everyone, everywhere." Carter scoffed. "No one will believe a cook." Her eyes locked on his. "I don't need them to believe me, I need them to see you." Sam's voice came through her earpiece then, low, urgent. "We're live, broadcast on every channel, every feed. The world is watching." The blood drained from Carter's face. Triton's calm cracked, a hairline fracture. His eyes sharpened, cutting toward John, then back to Sarah. "You think you've won," he said quietly, "but you've just signed your death warrants." John's voice was steel. "Maybe, but the world knows now, and you can't erase the world." For a long moment the room was still. The weight of decades of hidden deals, buried bodies, silenced witnesses, all pressed down like a storm waiting to break. Triton's jaw tightened. He stood, finally, his chair scraping back against the polished floor. "You've made enemies you don't even comprehend," he said. His voice was lower now, less certain, but still laced with venom. "You will spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders." Sarah rose too. Her hands trembled, but she didn't hide it. Trembling wasn't weakness. It was proof she still felt, still cared. "Then let them come," she said softly, "because I won't kneel again." For the first time, Triton's eyes met hers without dismissal, without arrogance. And in that silence, Sarah understood something. Men like him never feared bullets. They feared being seen. Outside, sirens wailed. Not Carter's men this time, not Triton's. Federal vehicles. Lawmen who could no longer pretend ignorance once the world had watched. John took Sarah's hand. "It's over." She squeezed it, eyes still on Triton. "No, this part is over, but the fight never ends." Later, on the steps of the courthouse, Sarah stood in the dawn light. The bruise on her cheek was nearly gone now, a faint shadow of what had been. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, voices swarmed. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Because the footage spoke louder than she ever could. John stood beside her, steady, protective, but letting her take the light. Henderson watched from the crowd, shoulders heavy but eyes proud. The team lingered in the shadows, men built for silence, not spotlight. The world moved, slowly, painfully, Carter in cuffs. Triton vanished into legal webs, his power fraying under public eyes. Nothing certain, nothing final, but the cracks had begun. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool morning air. She thought of the slap in the mess hall, the sting on her cheek, the silence of men who had done nothing. She thought of crawling for the camera under fire, of Townsend's grip, of her own whispered defiance, of every moment they tried to erase her. And she thought of this, standing in daylight, seen, heard. She opened her eyes, looked at John. He smiled faintly, the ghost of a man who had carried too much. "Worth it?" he asked. Her voice was quiet but certain, every second. She turned back to the cameras, the people, the world. And inside herself, she held a truth she hadn't known until now. Strength wasn't always bullets or fists or missions. Sometimes strength was refusing to be erased, refusing to kneel. Sometimes strength was silence that stood. And sometimes dignity didn't speak. It simply acted,